to school, to prove to Dad that I'm not a fool.
As Billy said, it's time to go back. Football isn't even 10 weeks away. The sun is setting earlier. Minutes earlier, in fact. The weather? Well, it's still hot, but sometimes it's a little cooler. Like it gets down to 74 or something. Folks, school is almost here. Sharpen those pencils, buy those overpriced books, and get your newest outfits ready, because it's time for Big Red Summer School.
Only the second time that the Maize and Blue are going to be playing in Memorial Stadium since these teams became conference rivals. Kind of hard to believe. And the gentleman who calls their games and will be making another appearance in Memorial Stadium in Lincoln, Nebraska. Jim Brandstatter joins us on the Dunder Mifflin Hotline. Jim, how are you? Happy summer and almost football season to you.
Hey, thank you very much. I appreciate Josh. Josh, you guys playing the victors behind you there. And, yeah, it's weird. Nebraska is such an iconic and traditional football power, and to be there only once since, we started playing football together in the same conference is kind of disappointing because that's a great stadium, great venue for football.
The only thing we could ask for is if the game were to kick off at 1 o'clock.
1 p.m., toe meets leather.
Amen, brother. Hey, you know what? Like this, Jim Beckler used to tell us this, and he used to say it, and he meant it to the bottom of his heart. He said, look, if TV wants to show up, that's great. Toe meets leather at 1 o'clock. You be there, we'll be there. If you show up at 4 o'clock, game's over.
And he was serious because the games actually did last less than 3 hours.
I was going to say, now 3 hours later it'd be in the third quarter.
Yeah, nowadays with TV commercials, man, oh, man.
Well, Jim, this is an interesting season for Michigan. A lot of changes on the coaching staff for Jim Harbaugh. But one of the chief criticisms is still there of Jim Harbaugh, and that is the inability to recruit and develop a program quarterback. Now, when you look ahead to this year, a couple of young guys who were recruited as four-year players, Cade McNamara, J.J. McCarthy are there, but then you bring in a transfer too, and Alan Bowman. How do you see this quarterback race playing out, and how important is it that one of those two high school kids develops into the next Michigan guy?
Well, I think it's very important. It's like that everywhere, though, and the criticism from Harbaugh in developing that quarterback, to be quite frank, I think it's sometimes a little bit overblown because it's not like everybody does it. And I give Ohio State, and they've been the scourge of the Big Ten and the country for that matter, but the last two quarterbacks they've had, they haven't been homegrown. They've come from somewhere else. So it's one of those things where you've got to hit that guy, and if you can hit on him, it's great. And Jim just haven't found that guy. We thought Joe Milton was going to be that guy. He's now down in Tennessee with a transfer portal. So right now, Cade McNamara probably will get the start. He won the job in the spring. J.J. McCarthy's the young freshman. The Bowman kid you mentioned coming in from Texas Tech. So, I mean, there's going to be competition for the job, and you just never know until they stand out there in front of 100,000 people, and they are the man. And they need to, have all those intangibles that quarterbacks need to have to take you to that next level. And all the physical skills, but there's other things that happen within a quarterback that you need to have happen in order to get to that next level.
Jim, how deep into August do you see the quarterback battle going, and could you actually see it going past August and into September?
I think a week before the season starts, it better, in my opinion, it should be 1, 2, and 3. I mean, they should know where they are. Now, Bowman's the X factor because he's coming in, didn't have the benefit of spring practice because on the transfer deal he couldn't come in and participate in spring. So, but from that standpoint, McNamara's got 2 years of experience under Josh Gaddis, the offensive coordinator. So my hope is, barring injury, that decision is made a week to 10 days prior to the opener, that the quarterback position is set.
Michigan is our focus today in Big Red Summer School. Jim Brandstatter, the voice of the Wolverines, joins us here on Unsportsmanlike Conduct. You know, Jim, I sometimes wonder if the importance of running backs in the modern game is as important as it used to be as back in the day. Then I think of Nebraska's situation where they're trying to find that one guy, and I go, yeah, it's still kind of important. Michigan doesn't seem to have that problem. There's some good talent coming back. Haskins back from last year, Blake Corum, but then Donovan Edwards, who's a young, promising 5-star, I believe he was out of high school. How do you see the battle for carries developing this year?
Well, that's interesting, too, because the new running back coach is Mike Hart. And Mike Hart's Michigan's all-time leading rusher, coached at Indiana, and Mike Hart is one of those guys who believes you need that back that's going to get the ball 20, 25 times a game. And so in the past, that hasn't been the case. I mean, Zach Charbonnet left. I mean, he got in the transfer portal and left. He was a big-time back. Chris Evans has gone on to the NFL. So Michigan has had in the past 2 or 3 years that running back that gets 14, 15 carries, but somebody else gets 10, somebody else gets 8. Mike Hart's the running back coach that I think is going to want to find that quote-unquote bell cow back. And right now Haskins appears to be that guy. So although Corum has had a tremendous offseason, he's gotten bigger, faster from everything we hear. So I think that's a competition that's going to happen in the spring or in the early fall too, between those 3 guys of who gets the most carries. But I think with Mike Hart as the running back coach, I think you're going to see Michigan going with one guy for the most part, just like Indiana did with Scott a year ago.
Jim, looking at the other side of the ball, going from a 4-3 to a 3-4, Don Brown now moving on. He is with Arizona. I'm wondering who you think on that side of the ball could benefit most from a change in philosophy on defense.
Man, I don't know. And I don't think anybody knows because we don't know what it's going to look like. You got to look at Baltimore Raven defense last year to kind of get an idea what Michigan's defense is going to look like. And they don't really have the personnel to fit the positions. I mean, they've got guys they call edge players, new football. That's a defensive end guy. I think Aiden Hutchinson, it will benefit him because I think you'll see him moving around and playing a lot of different positions, but giving him the best opportunity to rush the passer. I think Michael Barrett, moving from what used to be the Viper, which was kind of a safety linebacker hybrid for Don Brown, he will be inside and moving at linebacker. And Josh Ross back from injury, I think he's going to benefit. I like Daxton Hill at safety. I think he's going to benefit because I think he's going to be in a position to make a lot of plays. We're going to play more zone probably, less man-to-man. It's just one of those guessing games, but I think that from a personnel standpoint, their back end and their linebackers are fine. It's finding that combination of 3 to 4 or 5 guys up front, the edge rusher, linebacker, defensive end position, and who's going to fit those slots. That's going to be the interesting thing for Michigan defensively.
Jim Brandstatter joining us here on Unsportsmanlike Conduct as we talk about Michigan and our Big Red Summer School series. Don Brown liked to blitz a lot, and he liked to put those corners on an island, and
right.
That's the man-to-man. With the possible change maybe to more zone, do you anticipate that's less blitz pressures that you will see this year?
Probably. I mean, you'll see less all-out blitz. You'll see less 7 guys coming. But I think you'll see some blitz package. I mean, in Baltimore they did it, but they picked and choose. Then they didn't leave their corners out there on an island. And I think you'll see more zone. I think the crossing routes. It's also, I think, how the other guys attack you. And last year, if you look at Indiana and Ohio State, there was so much speed out wide. But they did a lot of crossing routes. They did a lot of one-man routes. If you're man-to-man, they did a lot of stop and go, stutter and go, and let the guy's speed try to get by your corners, and then let Fields throw the ball over the top. So I think what you're going to see is a lot of help, and I think you also see when that crossing route comes across, nobody's going to be trailing in a man position. That crossing route guy's going to run into a linebacker or run into a safety, and that's going to be hard for them to concentrate on catching the ball when there's somebody in the middle ready to tattoo them. So there's going to be a little difference in how they cover that route.
Jim, I feel like it's a crime if I don't talk to an old offensive lineman about the offensive line. A lot of experience back, 4th, 5th, even some 6-year guys back. Last year it was just an injury-riddled season. The offensive line couldn't really get a whole lot of a lot of stability through the course of a shortened season. Do you think maybe some of that experience some of the younger guys got, now they're becoming older guys, does a weakness from last year maybe turn into a strength this year?
I think so to some degree, and thank you for mentioning the offensive line. To me, that's the heart and soul of any football team. And I think that you're right. I think there's more depth and more experience because there were so many guys that did get a chance to play. Like a kid like Ryan Hayes, who didn't play much, but again, he's got a lot of starts under his belt, left tackle. Carson Barnhart, freshman a year ago, got more playing time than I think anybody thought he would. He'll be a factor this year. Andrew Stuber didn't play at all last year because of a knee injury. He was going to be the starter at right tackle. Now he's looking at right guard, right tackle as a possibility. So you're right. I think it may be gone from a weakness a year ago because of injury to even more experience, and I think maybe a little bit better this year. Now, you never know because you got to have five guys playing together as one in order for an offensive line to really, really gel. In addition to that, Sharon Moore, who is the tight ends coach, is moving into the offensive line to coach the offensive line. Ed Warner is gone. That's one of those changes again in the Michigan coaching staff that I think is going to benefit these young kids and the experience. And there's a lot of guys that got playing time. So now I think the competition offensive line this coming fall is going to be great because a lot of guys have experience, and there are going to be a lot of guys that are going to be able to play 2-3 positions. So they're going to get the best five guys out there playing that O-line.
Jim, it's interesting looking at this program big picture because I imagine that you have had a lot of similar conversations that we have had in terms of talking about the head coach of the team that you cover in Michigan, and we've certainly done so with Scott Frost in terms of what needs to be done on the field this fall as it pertains to the future. There was the quote from Ward Manuel back in March where he said, given the contract, obviously I'm willing to be patient, but Harbaugh and I understand that we need to win. This is Michigan. Nobody wants to win more than Jim in football and me overall. We want success. I can remember a very similar quote from Nebraska's old AD, Bill Moose. What is on the table, do you think, this fall in terms of what it could mean for 2022 and beyond with Harbaugh, especially given the new contract that he'll be working with?
Yeah, I mean, Jim's making less money. I mean, he took a cut in pay and all that other stuff when the new contract was signed a year ago. And what does it mean? Simple. I mean, last year was an aberration, in my opinion, because of COVID, because of it just was not Michigan. And I don't know whether it was, from within and COVID, and the players didn't get it, and the players just didn't want to be there. I just don't know the dynamic of what went on. But this year is totally different in my mind. And to me, there's only one thing Jim Harbaugh has to do. That's beat Ohio State. He's done everything. I mean, I know he gets a lot of rap about you haven't done this and you haven't done. If he beats Ohio State three times out of the 6 years he's there, we're not having this conversation, and he's close 3 times. But Ohio State, hey, look, there's a lot of people that haven't beaten Ohio State. so it's not like it's just us. But for us, for Michigan, that's a gigantic wart. But that's the only one that he has. That's the only thing that he hasn't really accomplished. Because the truth of the matter is, if he beats Ohio State one of those times, 2 of those times, he probably wins the Big Ten championship and gets to the Final Four. And again, we're not having this conversation. But to me, that's the thing that has to happen. You got to beat the Buckeyes for this program. And Indiana's better. Our division is not easy. We got Penn State. Maryland's getting better. Greg Schiano's done a good job at Rutgers. So it's not easy in the East. I know you guys know what it's like in the West. Wisconsin, Minnesota's getting better. Northwestern's no sure thing. So it's a tough deal out there in the West. Iowa's for real. And it's tough in the East. And the one thing that hits on Michigan, not only do you have to beat those guys like Penn State and Michigan State and Maryland and Rutgers and Indiana, you got to beat Ohio State, the big guy on the block, the big bully. And if Jim does that, I think the conversation of him being under fire goes away.
Will Dan Deerdorf be back with you this year?
Yes, he will.
That's awesome. That's good to hear.
Yeah, it is. Dan's one of the best of all time. I just love him. We've known each other for 52 years. We were teammates when we were sophomores and juniors on the Michigan team, and an outstanding broadcaster. And God bless, he still has that great passion for the game and the great passion for Michigan. Despite being the NFL Hall of Fame and all that other stuff, man, Michigan is – you can see a block M right on the middle of his forehead.
Well, I don't think there was a Monday night broadcast that went by without Deerdorf making some reference to Michigan all those years.
Exactly. There were a lot of funny stories. About that too. Schembecker called him up one night and yelled at him he was in the middle of a game, and back in the day, Bo was in a living room of Rick Meyer. Remember the quarterback from that went to later Notre Dame? And he's recruiting Rick Meyer, and they're watching Monday Night Football, and Bo is telling Rick Meyer, one of my guys is out here on the game. And so they watch the game, and Deerdorf says something about whoever was playing quarterback. He says, well, there hasn't been a Michigan quarterback to throw a touchdown pass in the National Football League since Todd Collins or something like that. Well, the next day, Dan's at home. He gets a call from Bo, and Bo just reams him and said, I'm sitting in a quarterback's house, and you said, how can you do that to me? It was pretty funny.
Poor guy.
Can you imagine?
That is amazing. Just incredible timing and all of that as well. You know?
I know. It's funny stuff. Some of this stuff you can't make up.
Amen. Well, Jim, I'm looking forward to having Michigan back in town. Like I said, we'd love to see the maize and blue in Memorial Stadium.
I'm looking forward to it, too. Like I said, Nebraska is such a historic and great football school, and with two great programs like this, that's the one thing about the East and West that I don't like so much, that we don't see the Nebraskas every year. That should be something that should be done, but hey, it's above my pay grade, I guess.
Yeah, amen to that. Jim Brandstatter, the voice of the Wolverines. Thanks a lot for the time as always, Jim.
Always glad to be with you guys. Take care.
You bet.
Thanks, Jim.
Jim Brandstatter joining us here on Unsportsmanlike Conduct.
Couple things about Michigan. You mentioned the blitzing. Mm-hmm. There was a stat in the Athletics preview of them. They blitzed on 43.8% of their snaps last year, 11th highest in the entire country, but they only averaged a sack and a half per game, which was tied for 104th in the country. So they were not getting home. And the thing about the offensive line, the 8 offensive linemen who played at least 120 snaps, I agree with him. That's something that in the moment you're like, this sucks. But, man, the following year it could end up being a huge positive because so many people have experience. Obviously they got to be good too, but just having some of that experience under their belt. Look, I'm not going to say Michigan's going to beat Ohio State. If that's what it takes for Harbaugh to have a job in 2022, Jim Harbaugh will not have a job with Michigan in 2022. But I do think that they can be better than a lot of people think going into this year.
I mentioned earlier that I see a historical parallel between this Michigan team and another team from Nebraska's past. This kind of and I'm not saying that Ward Manuel is Steve Peterson, but this kind of feels like 2003 Nebraska for Michigan. Because when you look, that was the year that Solich finally got a chance to maybe, jettison some older coaches, get a youth infusement. That's when Bo Pelini came in. That's when Marvin Sanders came in and, try to, energize the program. Harbaugh hired 6 guys under the age of 40.
Yeah.
Including his defensive coordinator, Mike McDonald, who has never been a defensive coordinator off of his brother's staff, where he wasn't a full. Well, I guess he wasn't one of the main assistants, but he was on that staff, and they want an entire youth movement, and Harbaugh is really energized by this group of coaches and thinks, hey, this is going to be good for us, because he thought maybe there was some disconnect the last couple of years, so. In a lot of ways, this kind of feels like 2003 felt, where now Harbaugh's getting a chance to try something completely different.
Plus, the contract situation, very unique, that a guy would take that big of a pay cut. Yeah, it's, look, I mean, like I just said, if it comes down to Ohio State, then I don't really know if I feel confident he'll be back next year.
Yeah, listen, I've been critical of Harbaugh, mainly on the quarterback situation. But Jim does bring up an interesting point. If they had been successful in a couple of those early games against Ohio State, we're not talking like this today.
They were inches away from beating them in 2016. If they beat them, they win the division, and they play Wisconsin, a team they'd already beat that year.
Right.
And if they win that game, they're going to the playoffs. And so I know that I just basically swung 2 more games in favor of them.
Sure.
They were that close. The 2018 game broke them. You read about this team and this program. What happened to them on the field against Ohio State? They were the favorite on the road. They had one loss. They lost to Notre Dame in the opener. They ripped off 10 in a row. They win that game once again. They win the division, and you know who they're playing that year? They're playing Northwestern, a team, once again, that they had already beaten in the regular season. They win that, they're going to the playoffs. So they were very, very, very close to making the playoff in 2 out of his first, 4 seasons. But those didn't go their way. And look, we talk about it with the program we cover in Nebraska. You get just a little bit of negative momentum, and then what was a really good 10-3 season, or at least at the beginning it was 10-1, suddenly turns into 10-3, and then you're 8-5. And then it's like, we're trending downward, and now you have to make a whole lot of changes on a
And that's why I say I don't think if I'm Michigan, unless this thing just goes up in smoke this year, and it just every move they made is a backfire. Let's say it's a 7-5. Let's say it's an 8-4 season, and let's say it's another loss to Ohio State. I would caution against Michigan making a move.
Well, they're undoubtedly better under Harbaugh than they were under the previous 2 coaches at least. So it's the best coach they've had since Lloyd Carr.
I'm using different years now, but I compared this year to 2003. In a way, this is kind of where Nebraska was with Bo Pelini. Mm-hmm. But the difference is that Harbaugh's a Michigan guy. Mm-hmm. I mean, through and through. You know he wants that job, and you know he wants to succeed very well at that job. There were other circumstances that I thought, and I still think to this day, required a change for Nebraska. I don't think Michigan's at that spot with Harbaugh, despite the noise that you hear from outside the program, especially from the national folks who look at that Michigan or that Ohio State game and say, well, they're not even close to being on the same plane as those guys. They obviously need to make a change. I would caution patience, especially with this infusion of young coaches. They're going to change the defense over.
He's a rich man's Bo and a poor man's T.O. He's a very interesting coach.
He is.
He's a very interesting coach.
Summer Sizzlers on 1620 The Zone. Your chance to win $1,500 in summer spending cash. It's online right now at 1620thezone.com. That's where you can find more information. We'll hear from Greg McDermott. We've got some audio as Bruce Rasmussen steps down today. Also, Jack Mitchell will join us later in the program. Steve Sipple coming up in an hour. Busy show today on 1620 The Zone.